It's time for our Thursday's Made in Korea, and joining us in the studio, as he always does, is Professor John DeMoya from the Seoul National University. Professor DeMoya, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much for having me.
Today's topic is going to be a two-parter.
Yes.
We'll call it two-parter because, this is going to get extended into other issues at hand. But I was reading an article that happened, that came up a couple of weeks ago, I believe. And it's basically spying allegations, in the past.
Yeah.
And then
Sure.
And our producer got into it. He was reading it. And then we started doing a deep dive into the story. And basically started with what we're going to be talking about today. Mm-hmm. And I was learning about it for the very first time, these spying allegations of, basically certain people allegedly giving information to North Korean spies and things like that, falsely accused, right? And so the deep dive led us into our two-part series today. Mm-hmm. Today we're going to be talking about what the Dongbaeklim case is. In the 1960s and 70s, South Koreans who were living in the Western Europe area were targeted for allegations of spying.
Yes.
Meaning that the reach of the government went far beyond the nation's borders. Right? And so we're going to be talking about who was targeted and why, and of course, how this leads into other cases moving forward to the point where we're going to make this a two-parter.
Right, this is where it will continue us to next week.
This is a very, very fascinating story.
Absolutely, and it extends and connects Korea to the larger Cold War network story.
And you know how we've talked about some of the more dark histories in Korean modern and contemporary history. Jeju, and how people were falsely accused. There's nothing worse than people being falsely accused for something and losing their life over it.
Or a long-term prison, which is essentially the equivalent.
Exactly. And, you basically get an apology from the government later on.
And you're now 70. Enjoy the rest of your life.
Yeah, exactly. So today's going to be quite a frustrating one, but still, I think also not talked about too much. Also.
Yeah, I have to admit, a good part of this in my own preparation was new to me. Some old, but much to be new.
As we always do, we're going to start things off with some background stuff here. What was the Dongbaeklim case?
Okay. The broadest version of the case is roughly in 1967. A number of Koreans, actually I've seen different estimates on the numbers, so I'm not positive, but I saw 194 on one site. I've seen smaller numbers for others. But these Koreans who were living in various parts of Western Europe, particularly in and around Berlin, because of the unique nature of East Berlin, West Berlin, situated in the Cold War, are accused of, at the mildest form, contact with North Koreans, in the extreme form, contact with North Koreans, actively passing them information. So they're essentially accused of spying, and many of them will be successfully prosecuted and put to prison terms.
And it's some of these people, you have to understand, during the 60s and 70s, right? This is not the Korea of the 2024.
No.
Where being able to live in Western Europe has different implications, right? I believe some of them are either students.
Yes.
Well-off students,
artists.
Professors, artists.
Right.
And so
generally people with some kind of cultural capital and actually maybe real capital.
No, real capital. It's very rare for Koreans.
Their material situations is not that of a farmer in the countryside. No,
absolutely not.
No,
so it's
not normal Koreans.
It's very, very different here. And for them to be targeted here, let's talk about why specifically. Is it just the basic idea that these Koreans who were living abroad in Europe were targeted because they were close to, in Berlin? There's just a fear of...
Should I go back a little bit in time, or should I talk about the present circumstances?
No, let's go back in time first.
In time is interesting first thing. I've never done... I don't work on this, but there's a 3-part volume book by Frank Hoffman called Koreans in Europe, one of which is about Koreans in Berlin, even back to the 20s and 30s. You get out during the colonial period and you go to Berlin. Why is this relevant to this discussion for 67? Berlin, Central Europe, is traditionally a place where if you were a problem, you want to be a little more free, you go. But if the government is looking at you, you're also more likely to be a radical, crazy. And there are interesting handfuls of Koreans in the 30s.
Commies.
Some will become commies, some will become Nazis, actually. And that's if you're interested to read Hoffman. But then the more present circumstances, same thing. Questions of living outside, connections with liberal circles. But there is speculation, and we'll get into this a little bit more, that Park Chung Hee, who went civilian in 63, needs to go on another election in 67, is looking for an outside distraction that will take attention away from domestic politics and whatever's going on back home. And that's been seen as the basis for the possibly, you trump up the accusations here, draw the attention here, and you can get away with a lot more.
People scholars, basically,
Yes.
and artists
Yes.
are mostly people that are being targeted. And it's interesting
Correct.
because if you and okay, maybe we'll talk about this later on,
sure.
but oftentimes, scholars and artists still in the modern times
Sure.
are often targeted for their overly liberal ideas and so forth.
And in fact, if you understand academia, that's exactly, people don't like it. That's the idea of tenure, is that you can pursue your work freely to avoid accusations of ideological. Yeah.
Speaking of
you are correct.
Speaking of which, there are certain names that pop up here. Although, again, you gave different numbers here and there. And
less than 200, but I've seen 30 to 40 up
I've
to
seen
about
different ones too.
180,
Like, it depends on who you ask.
A significant cluster, a large enough cluster that they drew attention. Yeah.
Ilno is one of the names, the first name that we're going to be talking about here. And remember, for our listeners out there, we talked about scholars and artists being targeted. Let's talk about who Ilno was.
Sure. He's a really fascinating guy, and he fits this perfectly in that he is a Korean who is Japanese trained, later goes to France in the 50s.
And many artists do.
Yes.
Many artists
And in fact, he, as much of his career before this accusation and after, felt much more comfortable in Western European art circles. He will eventually later, it's just worth pointing out, after this whole incident and some of his frustration, become a French citizen in the 80s.
Yeah.
So he's a Korean who has, a long-term expat. And this draws attention for a variety of reasons because, if I can get into it a little bit, the specific accusation directed at him in the 60s is that he allegedly, and I think this part is probably true, makes contact with the North Korean who promises that he can introduce he goes to East Berlin, meets this North Korean who says, I can introduce you to your son who was captured or taken over at some other point. In essence, I can help you if you help us. I believe it's his son that was either...
That sounds more like a ransom.
Yeah, something like that. But I don't think it's that you get to take him. It's that you can meet him where you normally would not.
Wait, so the North Koreans have his son?
I'm not sure whether the son defected something like that. Something like that.
I mean,
we will facilitate contact for you with this person who you could not meet other than through us.
Yeah. So we don't know if his son was taken by force or that he had defected to the North. And again, I mean,
so he goes to East Berlin to do this, and when that is revealed, this becomes you're spying for the North Koreans. I mean, if you buy this,
and this puts him in a very difficult situation because as a father, right? I mean, what you're going to do is going to potentially completely ruin you, especially given the fact that, Park Chung Hee in power, and they're not a big fan of communists and stuff like that. But now you're talking about being a chance for him to be able to meet his son. Mm-hmm. Eventually, what happens to him, though?
He does get accused. He is prosecuted successfully. I believe he does 2.5 years in prison.
That's
16.
it?
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I think it's the French side. I'm not sure how this worked, but whatever, through intervention.
Oh, because he's earned French citizenship.
He has. That's later, but he definitely has friends.
Okay.
He is definitely, people petition. He's released early, and he goes to France, not back to Korea. and he gets out very early. And this is, again, if you believe, and we'll get into this also in 1 and 2, people believe that I think people believe that he did go to East Berlin or had some contact. It's the degree of most of his supporters believe that the charges were trumped about the spying, and then the fact that he's released indicates that clearly some people believe him and he will go back to being an artist.
My thing is, what kind of information Ilno could potentially give to the North Koreans? You're talking about an artist, right?
No, but you've hit the right thing. That's the Dongbaeklim, the larger case. It's more that the idea that they are, because they're in Western Europe, because they can contact North Koreans through East Berlin, that they're going back and forth, and I guess potentially, circulating within Korean society, then coming back to Europe and sharing it with the North Koreans, something like that.
So you've been infected by a North Korean.
Precisely. The idea is that there is a network of people actively passing current information to the North Koreans.
You know what's crazy is every month we have a segment on Fridays called we have K Arts, and we have our art expert who often covers well-known Korean artists, like from the past, right? And I kid you not, probably like 8 out of the 10 really famous artists that we've talked about in that segment all went to Europe. Right?
I was waiting for this, yeah.
And so
no, this isn't uncommon.
The whole time I was just like, they probably have a lot of money because of art, or they were from a very good big family. But again, it's the idea.
I was just going to say, it's also about getting out into a space where you can express yourself more freely.
Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, and the observation you're making, this also holds for a certain number of Korean musicians. It also holds for a certain number of Korean scientists / academics.
Well, I mean,
being outside of Korea, I want to criticize, but for that time, the freedom and the possibilities were much greater outside.
Well, I mean, we talked about not too long ago, actually, a singer-songwriter, Kim Min-gi, known for his pro-democracy songs and how he was heavily censored by the government and so forth.
Exactly.
Obviously did not to the point because he didn't go to Western Europe or anything like that. But still, I mean, inside South Korea, I mean, he was heavily persecuted because of the messages that his songs carried, which still till this day, right? We often say musicians and artists, they do they have a more liberal belief, and that does not hold very well for conservatives and so forth. And this is an ongoing thing. Let's talk about whether or not there was a longer history to Koreans residing in Europe.
Yeah, and again, briefly, just to the Hoffman book, but then to update it a little bit. Yeah, not just, pre-war, which is you're getting out of the colonial period, but even post-war, yes, Korean artists, intellectuals, going to Europe.
And studying too, though.
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. And wider circles in which to circulate, better opportunity to display your work, better opportunity to get access to galleries. Some of the first Koreans to get a claim abroad, and actually in a weird, the usual, the old, you're bitter claimed abroad than back home because you're threatening at home, but abroad you're new and you're novel and you're cutting edge. And I guess also, I'm just trying to think of how to extend this. Materially, South Korea is still recovering from the Korean War. France suffered during World War II, but nothing so that it's just materially your life is probably easier. E is in Paris, he's in Berlin. Both of these places are probably more comfortable and a lot. Besides your artist life, your just average life is probably
and
better.
that's the crazy thing is that oftentimes nowadays, how we talk about like starving artists and things like that.
Yeah.
But even till today, I think we can say that anyone who actually studies art, you have to have some sort of money to be able to do that, right? It doesn't pay off that much away.
In a weird way, it's like, what's the old, because it's in the contemporary discussions of privilege, right? You already also kind of have to be on third base. You go run home and you say hit a home run, but you were already on third base.
Yeah,
I hate to say it, but yes.
Because the big joke was, I remember even in college in Syracuse, right? And I mean, Syracuse is a private school, very expensive. And I go, well, what are you studying? And they go, well, painting. I'm like, man, you must be from a really rich family.
I got to admit, this is where I feel a little bit seen. I was an English major. I was also in practical. So yes, similar type of. Yeah, it was not the most practical thing ever.
I wouldn't say English major is as...
No, but it was still, when I look back at myself at 20, it was a hugely impractical thing to do.
Oh, is it really? Okay,
yeah.
Well, I mean,
I'll tell you what you do. You end up being like a copywriter.
Let's talk about all of this other stuff that was happening with Lee Young-no here. We know that what happened allegedly between Lee and North Korean...
Yes, and then...
Do we know he was able to see his son, though? Because that would be frustrating, right?
It's a good question. I'll put it this way. I don't want to say 100% because I admit this is new to me, but I believe, yes, that there was contact, that there is some type of a meeting. He goes to East Berlin. Again, the question is, does that make him guilty of spying versus is this just contact interaction? And this is the bigger case. Is this a network or is this informally because Berlin is such a special space during the Cold War, you can run across each other? And also, if I can just give you like a contemporary situation example, when I was in Singapore, there were North Koreans regularly circulating through and it was not a big deal.
No.
And the South Korean embassy knew about this. It's special spaces that because of their unusual circumstances, that's the side of the people circulating. The Korean government at this time obviously saying, no, contact constitutes a crime.
Yeah, because I mean, nowadays, let's say you go to, for example, like Vietnam or something. And I know in Vietnam there's North Korean restaurants.
Thank you. You
right?
get it. Those are all throughout Southeast Asia, by the way. Burma. Perfect example.
You going to a North Korean restaurant, or even Vladivostok before when you used to be able to travel to Russia.
Does this mean you consorted with North Koreans?
Exactly. Because you see nowadays like YouTubers going to all these North Korean restaurants and talking to them and conversing with them. That part is gone. But back then it was a different world.
No, and if that were the case, then I definitely secondhand met I didn't meet North Koreans, but I hung out with Chinese students who hung out with North Korean students all the time in Singapore.
So you were somehow indirectly connected, and technically you would be...
Theoretically, I could be, yes.
The thing about...
Guilt by association.
Yeah. Crazy thing about espionage charges is the government, whoever's accusing you of espionage, can make up anything. Right, and that was the case with
because it's national security.
Yeah, exactly. That's the case with the Korean pastor, I believe, who was on a missionary work in Russia to help North Korean defectors.
This sounds like a similar type.
And
of
Russia just got him with espionage charges, and I think he's facing several years, whatever. And then got the it's getting very diplomatically
and similar
ugly.
accusations, not to get too much into it, were made against democracy advocates who were helping laborers in the 70s. You were a communist because you were helping organize.
Now, I don't know if it was because of the situation that Lee Young-no was in, and him being a parent wanting to see his son, and I don't know if this was being used during the court cases, but again, 2 years, you were saying
2.5 is what,
2.5 years.
Yeah. And that was not the sentence. The sentence was much longer, but he got early release through people advocating.
Oh, okay. So, okay.
And then he goes to France exactly to accommodate the.
Now he's just going.
He's like, I want
nothing about Korea.
Precisely, and then they said by 83 he will be a full French citizen.
And there were no repercussions after that.
Oh, that's something I think we can talk about for part 2.
Okay.
Yeah. We can say there's more. I want to save some for part 2, but yes, there are not personal but familial stuff will come up.
Now, again, I know that in the U.S., if I remember U.S. history, oh man, it's been a really long time.
Go ahead.
Red Scare.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
The whole idea McCarthyism, communism is bad, and communism is secretly spreading across the United States, and we have to stop this from happening, and so forth.
Communists are putting fluoridation into our water.
I remember
Sorry, that's Dr. Strange. That's Dr. Strangelove. Purity of essence. Don't drink vodka, not because vodka is not fluoridated.
There was posters like this in the United States. I remember learning.
Now
about
we laugh
this.
at it, but yes, it was taken very seriously.
Oh no, it was definitely serious.
Fluoridation was a communist conspiracy.
And I mentioned this because I'm assuming that in the 60s and 70s, maybe South Korea is going through the same thing because of Park Chung Hee and come on.
No,
right?
and more seriously again, to try to bring it back a little bit. Yeah, he's going through a second election up until 1967. Some of this particular case, the speculation, again, this is only speculation, but has been that the government was motivated to stir up these accusations to direct attention away from the electoral politics of whatever was controversial. In other words, move it abroad and give us a little more freedom of latitude domestically to do what we want.
How about this? Yeah. And again, I hate to use the word conspiracy theory, but how about this take? Okay,
go ahead.
The fact that those Koreans that are overseas, right, a little harder to control than if you're in the country.
And
right?
You want to show that you can control them to show your firm back home.
And maybe there was some fear that, especially amongst artists and scholars who are considered liberals and so forth, that they're talking badly about the current government and what's going on, the oppressive government, and letting the world know what's going on right now. Because remember, if you talk about Gwangju, the incident with Gwangju, how the military is preventing foreign media outlets from getting the news out and stuff like that.
If you're saying something along the lines of, do you want to show that even people abroad are still within the reach and you can't dissent? I buy that. I don't want to get into what the mechanics of it, but do I buy that motivation would be there? Sure.
Because, sure, in some ways, they could easily talk to people in other countries of how poorly the country is being run now.
I could even throw you an apocryphal story, and this is purely apocryphal, from a history text called Korea's Place in the Sun, which is well known, where the professor who wrote it said that he had one of his students tell him that when he came back home after completing a degree, I think at University of Washington, that he was called a namsan. And this is in the 70s.
Oh, geez.
And they didn't torture him. You know what they did? They sat him down and they said, read us what's on page 3 of your dissertation. He does. And they go, why did you write that? This goes on for hours. And when he finishes, they say, you got to understand, we knew what you were doing over there. We know what you're doing now. We just want to let you know while you're back here and you're now in your first job, we know everything you've thought and done, and just watch yourself.
Yeah. So,
so this, if that fits, That's
so for our overseas listeners out there, Professor Demoya mentioned Namsan, and
thank you.
There was a government building located near at the foot of the Namsan Mount Namsan. And that was a very notorious place where torturing was going on to try to squeeze out
not defectors, labor activists, students, those accused of spying.
Yeah.
What do you know? And tell us everything.
So I happened to work at the broadcast station that eventually took over that building.
Yeah.
And I've heard horror stories, but again, I remember because I remember you telling me about this Washington story because them sitting down, read the dissertation, and we all know.
I like the very subtle nature of it. That we're not going to torture you, but we could. We're just letting you know that like if you mess up in the future, you better watch yourself.
Because the other fear was that there was actually students who were spying for the government.
Oh,
right, because that's how they find out.
No, I'm sorry. That's the implication, and it's absolutely true. There were students in your graduate student group.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is also for the Taiwanese and the Kuomintang. If there were 5 of you, probably 1 or 2 of you were watching.
Fast forward to 2024 here, when we talk about this case again. I've talked about how Korea is relatively new to democracy.
Yeah, post 87. Yeah.
Korea was very, very different place in the 60s and 70s.
Very much so.
What do we think about this case now? Again, we just talked about Lee Young-no here, one person.
Sure.
As we go into part 2,
right.
We're going to talk about some other notable names. This case, how is it perceived by the Koreans now, and also the scholars?
Generally speaking, I think in this particular case, the belief is that Lee did make contact, but that he was probably not a spy, and the charges were trumped.
Yeah.
And then taking that to the present and linking, this becomes the interesting to the scholars is how has the government, assuming that was the case there, trumped up, in other cases, have artists, have scholars, have advocates of democracy been, how have these charges been used in other cases, even in a post-democratic era, being careful about names and places. But yeah, do states still do this? Does the Korean state still do this? It's something one can speculate about while being careful. ... Yeah.
I'm just going to go ... on this one because we
Fair
talk
enough.
because we've learned, I mean, this is a factual stuff, right? We learned in previous administrations that stuff like this was happening.
And this is not unique to Korea, of course.
Oh, definitely not.
To be fair.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And so we like to say that we've learned from the past mistakes, but sometimes these past mistakes do happen again, and it repeats itself. And sometimes I think some people might be listening to this story, not the whole meeting the North Koreans and being accused of a spy, but how this still happens in our daily lives in whatever countries.
One, regardless of context, has to be careful when challenging a government on any issue.
Yeah, let's just put it at that. Professor Demoya, fascinating stuff here. And for our listeners out there, we're going to go into part 2.
Going to say, looking forward to it.
Yeah, because, I mean, there's other names and it gets even more frustrating. This is actually the least frustrating story of all the stories that we're going to be talking about in part 2. Professor Demoya, thank you as always for your lessons. Have a safe rest of the week. We'll see you again next week.
Thanks very much.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.